with that, I give you Joe Avellone.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ruben. Well, let me start by thanking Ruben, Jessica, Katie, and your colleagues, and Russ, I think it was, for sponsoring, John, for sponsoring this wonderful forum. I know what it takes to pull these things together. I can only imagine what it takes to do it repeatedly. So I really congratulate you for doing this, and thank all of you for coming out tonight. Here we are 10 months before an election, at least the primary, to talk about the future of the Commonwealth. I really appreciate it. It's what makes this state strong. It's what makes the Democratic Party so strong here. And actually, it's just great to be in this place where there's so much lore, political lore for sure. And if you look around the walls, you see all these politicians in every room, but actually, they're more than politicians. There's a lot of statesmen here. And so, yes, they were politicians, but they rose to be statesmen and real leaders in our country. And I think it's a great tradition. And it's a tradition that certainly is here in Massachusetts, but really is bedrock here in JP. So I'm very pleased to be part of it tonight. I am Joe Avellone. I'm running for governor. Running because I love this state. I love its people. I love our history. And I believe that we need to continue to improve the lives of everybody in our Commonwealth. That's what our bond is as a Commonwealth. That's why we are who we are. I started out 40 years ago in my career wanting to help people. That's why I went into medicine, and I did so at Harvard Medical School. And then I was privileged enough to train in surgery and become a surgeon at what was then Peterbilt Brigham Hospital, now Brigham and Women's Hospital. And one of my colleagues is here tonight. I'm so pleased to have him here. You'd be a lot better being operated on him now than me at this point, 30 years later. But it was very much a privilege to take care of patients and to be a surgeon. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about people's lives. And how families can struggle with unanticipated major illness in their lives, and how it is a strain on the whole family, economically, emotionally, in every other way. And I learned that day in and day out as a practicing surgeon, and I think it created a lot of lessons for me in life about how to help people, how institutions can help people as well. And then I learned after a few years of practicing surgery that I could help more people as a leader and a manager in our healthcare system, and that's really been the arc of my career for the past 30 years. I was the Chief Operating Officer of Blue Cross and Blue Shield back in the 90s when we modernized Blue Cross. We formed HMO Blue and a lot of the service lines that many of you might participate in today, and we put in quality measurements that still exist, and we controlled our healthcare costs in most of the 1990s. Then I started a company using the internet and was the CEO of it for 7 years to try to shorten the time frame by which drugs are developed. There's a 10-year span that if you can shorten it, many of these wonderful drugs can get to the market and be in doctors' hands earlier. And for the last 7 years, I've been running a global division of a large international medical research company called Parexel International. It's based here in Waltham. And we have 15,000 employees, which about 11,000 were in my division, which was the core business. And so I have a global workforce, and I have global competition and global clients. And so I know what we as Massachusetts need to do in order to increase the skills and bring the new businesses here that we need to bring here to expand and create the opportunity that we want for our middle class going forward. So I want to do everything I can now for the rest of my career, frankly, to do everything I can to protect Massachusetts and to build it for the future for our children and for generations to come. And you know, since I've started this campaign, I've been in 124 cities and towns, started last January, and I can tell you that this recession is still very close. We had a terrible recession and an agonizingly slow recovery. And I can tell you, if you've been sitting in these towns and cities like I have, and if you're talking to someone who has lost their job and it's been a couple of years and they still can't find a job, or recently I've been talking to people who now on in our so-called recovery have been laid off within the last 6 months. Or if you're talking to a person who has a job, but it's a job that's a much lesser level than the job that they were trained for and have no real idea how they're going to build their way back to the skills, to their chosen profession. Or if you're talking to a single mother who lost her full-time job and has now two half-time jobs, 2 part-time jobs, just to put enough food on the table, just to make ends meet, let alone get out of the deep financial hole that she's been in. If you see all these people as I have, then you know that the recession is still very close. And we are recovering very unevenly around the state. There are still many cities in our Commonwealth where the unemployment rate is 10% or 10% plus. And these towns are not going to get, cities are not going to get better just on their own with the reflating of the economy. So our future is jobs and job creation, but we can't really do it with business as usual anymore. We're entering a new century, and with new century comes new industries, and we need those industries to be here. So Massachusetts has to adapt, and these new industries are on the basis of smart manufacturing and precision manufacturing and life sciences and alternative energy, and we're going to have to do things differently in order to get them to come here. And one is to use our education system differently and more proactively. Our community and state colleges and vocational schools in particular, to understand the work skills, to make sure we have them so that every child that graduates from a community college or a state college or a vocational school has the skills to set them up for success. And if we do that, I know we can bring these industries here. I know it from my own experience in the world, where we have academies in other countries that work with the university systems and hire those employees, and we need to do a lot more of that in Massachusetts. And so because education is so important to the future, I've already published my K through 12 plan for education on my website, and you can see it there, but my focus is closing the achievement gap. We have very good public schools across the state, and we all know how well we have improved over 20 years, but the gap between the good performing schools and those low performing schools in many poor districts is too large. And we are having thousands of kids every year going through a system where they either don't finish, or if they do finish, there's no way they can exist even in today's modern workforce and be able to raise a family and have a fulfilling life, let alone in tomorrow's. So closing the achievement gap and bringing these new skills for the new industries has got to be fundamental to how we proceed in the Commonwealth. We also need to control our healthcare costs. We know we have some of the finest healthcare in the world, and certainly I was in one of those fine institutions for a long time. But we have some of the highest healthcare costs in the world, and we know that we can do better. And as the next governor, we'll have to take this on, working with all of our major institutions, and I know that I can do that, having done it at Blue Cross. So nobody can do all these things alone. It takes collective action. Bill Clinton at the Democratic National Convention last summer said, 2 summers ago already, said, a political philosophy that's built on we're all in this together is much stronger than one that says you're on your own. Well, I know that's true, and I know you're all here tonight because you believe that's true. But I think now we need leadership that is bold and different and moves us in a different direction, just to be true to our values. And I know that I can be that leader. I can provide the kind of leadership at this time and in this Commonwealth. And before I close, I would just say, people often ask me, why do I want to be governor? I've had this long career in healthcare. I'd like to say this. 6 weeks ago, I was in Roxbury looking at programs that I thought could help with the youth violence issue. I came to the Haley House Bakery and Cafe. Some of you might know the Haley House. The bakery and cafe takes young people that have been in jail and are out and brings them into the program and gives them catering and baking skills. And after 6 months, it finds them jobs, which restarts their life. This is a wonderful program, and I was standing in the parking lot afterwards, and one of the young men that we had seen on the tour inside came to me in the parking lot before I left and said, before you go, I just want you to know that this place has saved my life. He said, I grew up here in Roxbury, a couple blocks away. I went off the tracks, I went the wrong way, I did my time. And when I came out, I was very lost. I had no idea what to do, and I was going to fall back into the life. But this program found me. I did the 6 months of training. Now I have 2 part-time jobs. And he said, I have 2 little boys, and they couldn't be more proud of me than if I was going to Harvard. That's why I want to be governor, because I know that together, collectively, with the right-minded thinking that we have here, we can make it possible for everybody in our Commonwealth to do well and live a fulfilling life. So let me just stop there, and I'd love to take your questions, because I know you have a lot of questions, in this particular in this
I'm
group.
going to start us off with one, but you folks who are standing, there's a couple seats up here and over here if you want to come up and sit. So to start us off, I appreciate you speaking about some of the families and young people you've met who are struggling with multiple jobs, etc. So our first question is sort of around that issue. The legislature and the governor, as you know, are considering reforms to they just recently considered reforms to the state's cash assistance program. And the proposed law requires a lot of burdens, such as requiring an 8-month pregnant woman to show proof of an ongoing job to qualify for benefits. As many as 4,500 people will be removed from disability assistance. Immigrants could be removed from housing. Can you talk a little bit about how you view these attempts to change welfare programs and how you as governor would stand up for struggling families?
Well, first of all, I mean, as a general principle, we have an obligation to take care of the neediest among us, and certainly the people that can't take care of themselves. I mean, I've spent 6 years on the board of Boston Healthcare for the Homeless, and I only bring that up because it's such a fantastic institution. That is the ultimate safety net. These are people that have fallen right out onto the street. Seeing their desperate plight that they have, it's so clear that we as a society have an obligation. So this, of course, is not exactly everybody that you were talking about, but I agree that as a state, more than the federal government and probably beyond the local governments, the state needs to take on the idea of supporting those who are in need, and hopefully in a transitional state. So I don't agree with cranking back on either the levels of payment or certainly increasing the requirements, and certainly not now. If you go around the state and see the 10% plus unemployment and the plight of some of the inner cities in what are called our gateway cities, you realize that there's still a lot of help. We're not out of our tough times, and we aren't going to be for a while. So I don't think this is the time to be reforming anything. This is, if anything, it may be the time where we have to make sure we have enough assistance for people.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Charter schools taking money away from Boston public schools, which seems as if Connolly was in favor of.
Charter schools only have one purpose as far as I'm concerned, and it's not to create a separate school system. If they are in a school system, it's only to take the learnings and apply them into the public school system itself. That's what they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be innovation centers. And so that means two things. That means they have to have the same population that would be in the public school system in order to have it be relevant. And secondly, we have to make sure that those learnings get transferred. So I do not favor charter schools with the idea that they just create another option and a separate school system. I only favor them as innovation centers, and only if the learnings can be transferable.
What are your thoughts on a carbon tax? As governor, would you help Massachusetts lead in actually reducing emissions like British Columbia has done in Canada?
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Awesome.
Okay. First of all, I believe the environmental issue is almost a generational moral issue for us. I have grown children. I don't want to pass on a deteriorated environment to them, and I know they wouldn't want to on to future generations. So for us, there's a line in the sand I think we should draw around the environment, and that means being very aggressive in Massachusetts, as we have historically around air and water quality, including what we can do for global warming. So I'm very aggressive on that, and I agree with many of the aggressive actions that we have taken in the past, and I would be at least that in the future. The emission caps, the leadership we've taken in our region to try, and also our attempts to try and influence Washington through our delegation in there. I would continue that and be more aggressive. I am interested in the carbon tax, which probably everybody knows, but essentially would be a tax that would start to put the true cost of using fossil fuels on the onus of those who are using the fossil fuels. So it would essentially tax the so-called externalities. And I believe that that's a good way to go. It has to be carefully constructed so that it ends up being revenue neutral. It's not meant to be an additional tax. And I think that's where the questioner was going. And so I agree with the idea of it. I think it has to be carefully structured so that it doesn't harm the economy or individuals. And it can be that if we can make it revenue neutral. And so that would entail lowering some other taxes that would be relevant in order to keep it. So there's a variety of ways to do that. And I think there's a bill in the legislature or two. And I think over the next year or two, and certainly by the time I get elected, hopefully I do, it'll be on our table to try and sort out a couple of options. I do like the idea of making sure that whatever we lower doesn't harm jobs, and in fact may just the opposite. Whatever we do with the tax structure on the carbon tax, I want to make sure that the offsets continue job growth, because job growth is so critical to our state, and we are not going to bring our gateway cities back until we have new jobs. So I love the carbon tax. I want to make sure we do it in a way that it doesn't hinder job growth, and I think that's quite possible.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, as a healthcare executive, I wondered what your thoughts are on the merits of following Vermont's lead and instituting a single-payer healthcare system in the state.
I think the big issue for us is quality and cost. And the main way to get at quality and cost of our delivery system, it actually sits underneath the insurance mechanism, whatever it is, whether it's multi-payer or single-payer. The big issue is how we actually practice medicine and how we're organized to do it, how the doctors are organized. So the insurance mechanism itself, right now, we've gone through 2 debates, one in Massachusetts 7 years ago, and have a multi-payer system that now has everybody insured, and now we also went through the national debate. I would not, I'm not religious about single payer, and that I think what we have to do now is go on to work on the delivery system. We have 99% of people insured in the country, and the delivery system itself is what has to improve in order for us to actually have stable cost and better outcomes. If in fact the insurance companies don't perform, they don't add any value after years more of us being in where we are in Massachusetts, and it evolves to single payer, I don't have a problem with that. The issue really ultimately underneath it is how we deliver medicine. The insurance mechanism has to deliver value, or it'll probably move towards single payer and evolve in that way. But I don't think we ought to refight the debate now, because it'll take the eye off the ball of what we really need to do, which is essentially to change how the delivery system operates. That's what will really get us to efficient care.
To divest the,
1 second, I'm trying to let everyone ask a question. Did you have a question?
Oh, yeah. Can you tell me what your feelings are about casinos in Massachusetts?
I don't, yeah, what are my feelings about casinos? I don't personally think casinos were a great answer for the state, and I certainly don't think it was a great answer for the revenue situations in the state, and we all know that they have downsides. So I don't, if we were starting from scratch today, I wouldn't favor a big casino bill. Now that now we have a bill. It does allow for local decision-making about that, and I think that's actually working. We're having communities that are turning down casinos, and I think that's appropriate. So although I don't favor them generally, I think the process is working that allows local communities to make their decisions now.
What do you think of the citizen movement to do a ballot initiative to repeal it?
I think we have a system that allows each community to decide, and so rather than repealing that after it was just passed a couple years ago, I would just like to see the process play out. And I would say referendum government in general is not a good precedent for us. I think passing laws and then repealing them through referendum a year or two later essentially starts to recreate the gridlock we have in Washington, which I don't want to see here. I don't think we want to see here. And also, we have an example in California how lots of things happen by referendum bypassing the legislature, and yet we have this duly elected legislature that can study issues, that can make considered judgments, and I think we ought to use it. So I don't really favor referendum government generally, and I don't like the idea that it would try to quickly repeal something that was passed 2 years prior. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering if you could speak a bit about, you mentioned job growth and some of the ways that we measure the types of jobs that are out there. And I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit about any sort of differentiation you do within the realm of jobs in terms of, are all jobs the same, good jobs, bad jobs, and how in your position as, if you were to become governor, how would you, in your economic platform, focus our efforts towards what could be, in your eyes, the right jobs, and
yeah.
What sort of incentive structures would you build?
Well, jobs have to come in all varieties. I mean, not every job is a high-tech job of the future because that's just not the way our society is. And lots of very good goods and services can be provided by people doing very good work at all levels of kind of training and skills. So, but I think there are a couple things about that. One is we can't build a new economy on declining older industries. That just won't work. So we can't have lots of small businesses being spawned off of declining industries. That just doesn't work. So people that say, well, small business creates lots of jobs. Yes, it does. But it actually needs the newer industries around it to create the spin-offs and to create the opportunity for a lot of the small businesses to actually exist. So I think the first dimension is, why do we need new industries? We need new industries. That's really going to power the future of all our jobs, both skilled and non-skilled. The second is not everybody has to be high-skilled around college or beyond. Even though a lot of skills are increasing, half of the so-called STEM jobs in the state today, those are science, technology, engineering, or math-type jobs, don't require a post-high school education. And so I think vocational training back in the curriculum, and that's part of my K through 12 plan as you see it, back in the traditional curriculum, in addition to the voc tech schools we've had, would be important for people. These are good jobs, and you can raise families on these jobs. And it doesn't mean that everybody has to take on huge debt and go on to college in order to be able to do it. So I do think our future is going to be a whole mix of ranges. It's going to take skills, but not necessarily skills that you have to get in higher education. Yes, sir.
The Haley House is actually a really good example of a process that actually gets people into one system into another system, criminal justice system into business system.
Yeah.
But it's a micro answer to a macro problem. There are 20,000 people in the Corey program right now with Corey designations. If you think of it as that Haley mechanism as a shunt, that term, you need. And you think of the blockage that it has to get through. You need a lot more shunts for a lot bigger shunts. And one of the mechanisms that do this may be urban core markets that are in operation in cities all over the world, except here in the United States. The issue is, how do you get the scale of the problem? There's a major meeting in Dorchester about incarceration. There are thousands of people that are impacted, their families and everything. It's a huge, big problem, and that was just in Boston.
Yeah. No.
How do you deal with the scale?
I think, first of all, it's a great question. I think the issue of youth and youth violence and essentially incarceration in our state, let alone our society, is very large. So I think you have to attack it at multiple points. And first of all, you can't say it's overwhelming and we can't do anything about it. I guess to start at the highest level, we have way too many people in jail. We have way too many people that are in jail for minor offenses and never belonged in jail in the first place. And once they're in the system, their lives get so much more difficult. They can't get jobs when they get out. They learn to be, some of them, hardened criminals to begin with. And so life deteriorates for them very rapidly. And if they're in there for some small minor drug offense or something that they could have learned in some other way, the right path, it would be much better. So I would push for definitely changing the laws so that we're not putting people, near as many people in jail as go today, especially young people in inner cities whose lives then are irreparably changed. I also believe that we do have to start to think about the Corey laws and how we change that, and especially for certain kinds of offenses, make it more possible for people to get work afterwards. But that's at the highest level. Beyond that, I do think you have two issues. You got to deal with the youth before they end up in gangs, because gang and gang-related violence is still what a lot of this is. And then also deal with the reentry programs if they've been incarcerated, as you were assuming. And you have to do it on a much larger scale. So last summer, I spent a lot of time looking at both of these types of programs, and there are some great examples around the state. There's Roca in Chelsea, there's UTEC in Lowell, and there's other programs like Youth Build here in Boston. These are all pretty well designed to find people, young kids, basically males often, just as they drift into the gangs, and give them an alternative. I think we definitely have to do that because they're not going to get it out of the straight school system right now, especially if they're dropping out by the time they do move towards these gangs. So I believe that's something that the state needs to help with, because I think it's beyond individual communities. I think the fact that youth violence and the devastation that goes with it has been back on the rise means we have to turn our attention to it. And I can tell you for sure, having been in these cities, that there's no way that some of these gateway cities can mount this on their own. It's going to take help from the state to make sure we take best practices and move it to these other cities. Yes, ma'am.
Can we divest the state pension fund from fossil fuels?
Well, I would like to use the state pension fund in some creative ways around investment in infrastructure and things in the state that we can definitely use. As far as divesting it from fossil fuels as a symbolic act, I'm not sure it helps us. It's a nice gesture, but I'm not sure it helps us. So I guess before signing up for that, I'd also like to know what the impact is on the pension, because we need it. But I'd like to understand if there are other creative ways we could use, like investing in infrastructure, so that we can actually get to some of the infrastructure agenda that we need in the state. Once again, to grow jobs. I think what you're going to find is I'm very interested in results. I'm very interested in growing jobs. I may not be the most progressive candidate, but I'm the one that is going to get things done. And the way you get things done is by creating opportunity for people. Then I think a lot of things take care of themselves.
How will the diversity of our state be represented in your administration if you were to become the governor? And how have you implemented that in your past business experiences, maybe your boards?
No, that's a great question. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, how will the diversity of the state be reflected in an administration that I would be in charge of, and how have I done that in the past in my various business experiences? I think that, first of all, at the general level in the state government, I would definitely have the state government, especially the leadership, reflect the diversity of our population. And by the way, the diversity is unbelievable in our state. It is so much more than, well, we have a couple different diverse groups here. We have lots and lots of diverse groups here. So I think we are truly changing rapidly over the last decade. And I think it's a wonderful thing for Massachusetts, but the state has to catch up with that. So I definitely would want to reflect that. In my past experiences, I have tried to hire from communities of color and others, and I think we've done in all the companies I've been in, I think we've done a good job for that. I think actually we did a pretty good job for that at Blue Cross. We paid special attention to that. Had special attention in our HR departments to try and do that, and I was certainly a big proponent of that. I would say in my town when I was a selectman, we had a bad incident that was a real time for us to reflect on what we were thinking in this town of Wellesley. I don't know how many of you could go all the way back to Dee Brown, the basketball player, but Dee Brown, the basketball player, was apprehended by our police walking into a bank to get a mortgage because they thought he was going to rob the bank. And I was the selectman. So this was a huge change for us, and it made us realize what we weren't doing. So we instituted training programs and a commission that has sponsors training programs and still has it to this day, 20 years later. We instituted all the things you could imagine in the police department around training and actually removing some people, et cetera. So I think there's zero tolerance for being intolerant and ignorant, frankly, about diversity. And I think that's the way I would want to do it in the government as well.
Question?
Yes.
I was just listening to public radio thing this afternoon. A new national survey shows that as part of this test mania and so forth, and getting scores, that people feel that their entire careers, teachers, principals, so forth, are resting on, they're going to fall apart if the scores aren't going up.
Right.
Apparently, this recent survey, school lunch times have now been squeezed down to 15 minutes. I mean, a horrible intersection of biology and medicine and education and social policy. I guess in general, I think the testing thing has become way too much of a focus of education. In fact, it's a diversion from education.
Yeah.
What are you prepared to do about that? Maybe even coming out of your Wellesley experience.
So I published my K through 12 policy on my website because I think getting education right is the most important thing for us going forward as a society, not only for the lives of our children, but for our own economy. And I talked about closing the achievement gap as being my number one priority. And in doing that, if you look, you'll see I focus on the things that I know work. We all know work, I should say. All educators know work. One is pre-K. So in the troubled school districts where they are at risk for underperforming, the state, I think, in my plan, is going to fund pre-K, and it's going to fund a lengthening school day, and it's going to fund in the lengthened school day. It will emphasize academic support and enrichment programs, not more classroom time per se. So as far as the structure of the school and what they're getting out of it and getting more kids literate by the third grade and having a richer experience for longer hours, that's going to be the core. We know those things work. It will be my highest priority. It will be funded. But as far as evaluation, both teacher evaluation and student evaluation around the testing, I agree. We've had time now with MCAS, and we're also instituting this new testing approach with PARC as a pilot. And I think we have to broaden it. It needs to be more holistic. None of those things test critical thinking, which is in the end what we really do need to have our children be able to do. None of those things test the teacher's performance well enough. And there are lots of models in business about how to measure performance. And I think we can apply some of them. There are peer reviews and 360 reviews and all those kinds of things. So I think the next generation of evaluation, both for students and for teachers and the school system, because each level gets evaluated, needs to become more holistic. And I think we have models in business. So it's not like we have to reinvent the world, but we do have to apply them and get away from testing only and therefore teaching to the test, which is, I think, the problem that you're pointing to. Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Or the group has a question for you. In last year's budget, state budget cycle, the governor proposed what we viewed as a progressive change to the tax structure of the Commonwealth, reducing the regressive sales tax, ignoring the regressive gas tax, and focusing on changes to the income tax that would have resulted in increased taxes on upper income earners and reduced taxes on lower and middle income earners. The changes would have added $2 billion in revenue to education, specifically access to early education and care, and transportation primarily. The legislature rejected this proposal, as you know, and instituted a $500 million gas tax. As governor, or if you had gone back in time and were governor then, which proposal would you have supported?
Well, I'm on the record for this, and which is I did not favor the broad-based tax. Once again, having been all over this Commonwealth and especially in our poorer cities, I think we are way too fragile in our recovery to have taken on a broad-based tax. I understand that we've been through a difficult recession and we've underinvested in certain things, but at this particular time last year, the federal waiver on part of the payroll tax was also removed, so everybody was having a tax increase, and then to put a broad-based tax on top of it at the level of $2 billion, I thought was not wise for our economy. I did favor the dedicated revenue stream for the infrastructure tax, and that was the gas tax. I did not favor the software tax. I thought that was a huge mistake. As soon as it came out, I had a press release. I was the only Democratic candidate, and I think I was ahead of any of the Republicans on saying this is wrong. It's essentially an unpredictable tax going right at an industry we need to nourish for our future, and there's other ways to find it. Well, of course, everybody decided that was right a month or two later. So I lined up on against the broad base for the dedicated revenue, which included the gas tax, for infrastructure, and against the software tax. As far as progressivity itself, I think generally I'm for progressivity. And yes, we don't have enough progressivity in our tax structure at the state level, and it's going to require a constitutional amendment probably to actually create a progressive system. So Governor Patrick's, I think, attempt around the progressivity, not raising more revenue per se, around the progressivity was too complicated for most people to understand at the level that they're going to understand it. So I think a more straightforward approach to a progressive approach to our tax system is probably what I would recommend in the future.
As governor, is that something you would explore?
Yeah, explore is right, because I think you have to figure out what we really need to do with our Constitution, et cetera, in order to even enable it, and what is the best path to do it.
Just to follow up on that, would you treat capital gains, income from capital gains different than wage income under taxes?
Well, I certainly don't like the fact that some things that really aren't capital gains are taxed as capital gains, and that has to do with carry interest and things on hedge funds and private equity. So I think that's just a mistake in gaming the system. I don't think I would equalize capital gains and income taxes. I do think there is a role for stimulating the economy, stimulating the ability to invest. I mean, we need investment as a state and also as a nation. I don't know, I wouldn't comment on whether the levels are exactly right, but I don't mind there being a difference.
Time for another question or two, all the way in the back standing.
Developing your capital spending plan for Commonwealth, would you maintain the Patrick Murray administration's 8% debt service bond cap?
I don't know. I don't know enough about that, to tell you the truth, whether that's what the implications are on either side, but I certainly wouldn't mind looking into it, and I'll get back to you about it if so.
I guess speaking to another type of investment, you had spoken a bit about higher education and how it fits into education in general on your platform. I'm wondering what your stance would be about the cost of higher education. We've seen
That's a good question.
Senator Warren tackle some of these issues in Washington, D.C., and I'm wondering, as governor, what do you see your role being with the cost of higher education?
Yeah. It's a great question. Absolutely, we have a role. I think historically we've underinvested in our own state system. State systems are incredibly important. That's what generates people who are actually going to stay and work in our economy. Our wonderful private institutions, which we have, are terrific, but 50% of the people come and go. 80% of the people stay and work coming out of our state and community colleges, and we need to make sure we invest and that's affordable. And so over years, having underinvested, it's gotten too expensive and the fees got too high, and we have to change that. Last year in the budget, at least, there was funding it to the point of covering half the cost, and that's a good start. And if that starts to create a reasonable level of tuition for a state college, then that may be the level. Whatever that level is, we have to maintain that, or why have the system at all? As far as the loan payments go, I think Elizabeth Warren is exactly right. I think the fact that the interest rates are so high at a time when our interest rates generally are so historically low creates this huge charge effectively to our students who are taking on this enormous debt, and somebody's making money on it. That seems crazy to me. I think we definitely ought to change the federal law, and I would certainly support everything she's doing to make that difference much, much smaller, and not have people making money on our own students who are trying to get their life started.
Would you, as a follow-up, would you would you somehow dedicate some revenue stream to the higher education system so that, right now, I have a son in UMass, it's $25,000 a year to go to UMass. It's gotten really expensive, and that's.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be dedicated, but I would make it a high priority so that it would essentially get funded. As you saw, my whole idea of how we need to proceed as a Commonwealth is based on community state colleges, voc tech schools, and improving our public K through 12. That means investment. That means high priority. And I believe we can do that without raising taxes, to tell you the truth. And I know that sounds like a magic solution, but think of, once again, go back to healthcare costs. Healthcare costs are 40% of the state budget right now. They were 20% 12 years ago, and they're heading towards 50%. 40% of $34 billion is about, do the math, $13 billion. $13 billion. 1% of that, if the healthcare cost was 39% of the state budget instead of 40% of the state budget, it's about $150 million. These are the kinds of numbers we're talking about. So we have to move to control and make more moderated our healthcare costs, and that creates a lot of headroom in the budget that have gotten used to not being there, and it's prevented us from investing in other things. It can be there. We can run our healthcare system at a much better and more moderate inflation rate, and in doing so, it will create a lot more room to invest in things we do need to invest in, like higher education, therefore keeping the tuitions low, without having to raise taxes on everybody, which will be hard to do in any case, even if we in this room wanted to do it.
One more question from the group? The young woman in the back.
You keep talking about stabilizing the healthcare industry to bring costs down. That will allow all these other things to happen. How would you make that go?
I don't want to give you a complicated answer because it is complicated, but I can tell you this. What our delivery system needs to do is move away from uncoordinated care and fee-for-service towards coordinated care with larger groups of physicians managing populations of patients. And there are models to do that. There are many models in the country where that's very successful, and it shows a more stable cost structure. And that's what we have to do. And we have passed a law already, the healthcare cost control law of 2 years ago, where the Patrick administration has set up the framework to do that. So we have a health policy commission is collecting data on the true costs of care among different institutions and their doctors. They will be able to point out outliers and ask them to move towards the mean. And in doing so, they have to have their physicians organized and agree on best practices more. So the pathway for doing this is actually, the framework for doing this is set. It's having the political will to do it, and having a governor who actually knows enough about this to make sure that these institutions do move down this road in a way that is acceptable to all of us, because these institutions have to be, we have to keep these institutions able to do the mission that they are set up for, especially some of the teaching hospitals in Boston itself. It's all doable. There are models in the country and other places where these kinds of systems exist, and they can exist here. We can be a leader in doing that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for everyone's questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, thanks. Yeah. So just in closing, I want to thank you all for your great questions. I want to tell you that I want to dedicate the rest of my life to doing everything we can to make our Commonwealth better. I think we have a lot of goodwill in this state. I think I'm very optimistic about our future, But I know we have to do things differently and boldly, and I hope that you'll see that I can be the leader that'll do that. So thank you again for your time.